Thanks for joining us. Today on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces attack Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. At least 10 people are killed so far.
The Nigerian federal government says it will begin evacuation of Nigerians from Ukraine Wednesday.
In addition to that story, how will sanctions imposed on Russia impact on global financial systems and global economy? Thanks for joining us this full hour of our coverage. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. It's day 6 since Russian forces invaded Ukraine and have been resisted by the Ukrainian forces.
And today, Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, has been hit by a Russian missile. At least 10 people have been killed, dozens more injured.
The missiles hit an opera house and concert hall in the central Freedom Square. Here's more in this report.
Footage released by the emergency services of Ukraine today show the moment a Russian missile attack struck the regional administration building in Kharkiv. Surveillance footage showing Vobody Square and aired by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine matched Google Street View imagery of the square and third-party imagery of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration building, and social media video of the aftermath was also matched with the same location. Ukraine's foreign minister condemned the attacks at the central Freedom Square and residential district of Kharkiv on Twitter, calling it barbaric. He called on the world to do more to increase pressure on Russia and isolate the country fully. In the aftermath of the attacks, rescuers were captured taking bodies of victims out of damaged buildings in the city center. And according to the Interior Ministry, at least 10 people were killed and 35 wounded in rocket strikes by Russian forces on Kharkiv. Kharkiv regional head Oleg Sinyagubov says that Russian missile attacks hit the center of the city, including residential areas and the city's administration building. He said Russia launched Grad and cruise missiles on Kharkiv and was guilty of war crimes. Russia's denied attacks on civilians, saying its army hits only military infrastructure. Meanwhile, President Zelensky says Kharkiv and Kyiv are Russia's main targets now. He called the attack on Kharkiv an act of terrorism and called on the international community to recognize it as such. In the meantime, the Russian Defense Ministry has issued a warning to residents of Kyiv that it's preparing to hit targets in the city. Officials say Russian forces are preparing to launch high-precision strikes against technological centers of the Ukrainian Security Service and the 72nd Main PSYOP Center in Kyiv. The statement called on Ukrainian citizens being used by nationalists to carry out provocations against Russia, as well as Kyiv residents residing near relay stations to leave their homes. Officials claim the strikes are being carried out to prevent information attacks against Russia.
Well, many countries are concerned about getting nationals out of Ukraine as quickly as possible and back home. Here in Nigeria, the federal government has given the assurance that it will be beginning evacuating Nigerian students stranded in Ukraine from tomorrow, March 2nd. That's according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jeff Onyama, who was speaking during a meeting with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila. He says the evacuation follows the approval of the President.
We had to also see with Mr. President very quickly. Last week I went, saw him with the Chief of Staff, and he approved that we should go ahead with an airlift. And so we negotiated with their piece. So we have tentatively fixed for Wednesday. The idea is Romania is going to be the hub, and there are about 1,000 already that we're estimating to pick up from Romania. And then you have Slovakia, about 200, Poland also about 250, and Hungary, the same figure. There are about 150 going into wanting to go through Russia that we have asked students, our ambassadors, to try and get transit permits for. Some of them don't want to come back to the country, but the point is also that we've given a commitment to these transit countries that have given us timelines for the refugees to stay in their countries, and so we also have an obligation to ensure that within that timeline that they come back.
Well, sometime last week, we had spoken to some Nigerian students who were in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Now they've crossed to Romania. And she joins us now, Pelu and friends. Thanks for coming on the program. Hi, and how are you feeling today?
We're good. We're good. We're okay. We're okay. Thank you for
Pelu, tell us that the last time we spoke to you, you were in Vinnytsia, the national medical university there. What has happened since the last time we spoke?
A lot has happened. Even up to this morning, we still got the news about them bombing the Freedom Square, which is like a popular center that a lot of us travel to when we go to Kharkiv. Yeah. So there's just been a lot of things happening, trying to cross the border and people fainting, people missing. We have recorded about 2 deaths now of African students. Yeah. We just don't know their nationality. So it's been a lot, really. We can't really say that we are okay, even though we have crossed. It's just a lot to take in.
Yeah, a lot of trauma.
So you crossed, Pelu, you and your friends crossed into Romania. Tell us your experience at the border, because we heard quite a lot about the situation there. You just spoke about, some people dying and not making it across. So what exactly was your experience?
So actually, not all of us got to Romania actually, because in the last video, the last live that we did, we were like 5. Some of our friends had to go through to Poland. So we just scattered and for Romanian border, we can only serve a Romanian border. Yeah. We had to go from Ukrainian border and then to Romanian border. The Ukrainian border was a hustle. I tell you, terrible. It was survival of the fittest.
We trekked about 30 kilometers. 30 kilometers.
Yeah, 3 hours trek to the border, and then you have to also your way in.
Some people have been there for like 4 days.
I'm telling you. But once you enter the Ukrainian border, you are good to go. Yeah. Because the Romanian border didn't give us stress at all. Yeah, when we entered there, they picked us up. Then we were able to see the counselor that showed us where to go to. They were really nice. Both Romanians and the Nigerian government in Romania, they are really nice. They took care of us, put us in a bus, some of us in hotel, and then they paid everything. We didn't spend a dime. They were so nice. Then they took us to the capital where we are now, Bucharest. Booked a hotel for us, gave us food. Some of us gave us food and everything. And now we heard there will be an evacuation flight, right? Yes. Yeah. So yeah,
they have been helpful.
They've been really helpful.
I think the main thing was just staying at the border.
Yeah,
before crossing into Romania, it was really terrible. Yeah. People were hyperventilating. I know 3 of Nigerians almost fainted. It was really bad.
So tell us about, Pelu and friends, the federal government is saying it's beginning evacuation tomorrow. What do you know as to what is on ground, as to when it's happening and how they're preparing, and yourself as well?
Okay, so currently we're in contact with the representatives from the embassy. We've spoken to some of them and we've been told to make some lists of the people that we have per hotel, because most of us are in different hotels. So they are compiling lists of people in hotels. So according to the news given to us, they are ready to evacuate starting from tomorrow. but the thing is, how many can they evacuate at a time? That's the
we don't
know so much about it. We just know the dates and they asked us to make a list.
Because we're a lot here.
Yeah.
We're a lot.
everywhere.
But are you on that flight tomorrow? Do you know?
No, right now we don't know how things are going to be.
They just told us to write our names and then they'll get back to us probably.
Yeah.
Let's go back to where you're coming from, being Venezia. Was there a visible threat, that necessitated your decision to leave? Because I remember at that time, the message was, if there's nothing happening in your city, then perhaps you should stay there, you're safer. Tell us.
Okay, so for me, first of all, I know that Kyiv to Venezia is about 3 hours. And they've already almost taken more than half of Kyiv right now. Yeah. And from what we know from the last war, once they take the big cities and they've taken over the big cities, the small cities will not be a problem. And we're just 3 hours away. So when the opportunity came for us to leave Venezia to Romania, we just took it to be on the safe side. Yeah. It's better for us to be in a place where we know that we're 100% sure of safety and to be in a place that we are like 10% sure. So we decided that let's just take this opportunity and leave Venezia to Romania.
Yes, and also our school also they advised us to start leaving as soon as we can. They didn't say okay, if it is safe in Venezia, stay in school. No, they were like
they actually arranged buses.
They arranged buses. They even tried to get us on trains to go to the city of the West. That's Lviv. So most people went to Lviv, and that's how they go to the Polish border. Yeah,
but it wasn't compulsory because I know some people are still back in Venezia. They don't want to go anywhere.
They're still staying there.
So it wasn't compulsory.
I think some people also don't have the funds to leave. So
it's really
right.
Like people like those in Sun.
Yeah, people are stuck in
some cities.
It's scary.
So in other words, you're some of the lucky ones who've gotten out of Venezia, because I've heard there have been shellings in the city.
Thank God.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. So what's happening to school then? The moment you leave, do you have any information from your school when studies will be returning, or are you making up your minds to come back finally to Nigeria?
Okay, so the school actually they went on break. It was like
holiday.
Vacation.
So after the vacation, we don't know how long this vacation is going to extend to.
It's just 2 weeks. They already put it there, but then after the 2 weeks, we know what's the next 9 months for school.
Yeah.
Until after 2 weeks, then we know what they plan for us.
But possibly, do you think that it will continue online? Do you have that information?
Yeah. Most likely to be online. At least before they're able to rebuild everything they've lost and all.
Because we can't even still fly back to Ukraine anytime soon.
Yeah.
So if we can't go back to Ukraine, we can't have school offline.
Offline, yeah.
So thank you, Pelu and friends. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
And I feel like we've had such a great relationship with Pelumi and her friends. It'd be nice to know their names, though. I mean, we only know Pelumi. We don't know the other girls. But you wouldn't like to reveal your names still?
Yeah. I'm Fabumi Mercy.
I'm Favor.
Okay.
I'm Toby.
I'm Benefadizi.
All right. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you so much. And stay safe, safe travels, and hopefully you're on the flight back tomorrow.
We're wishing Pelumi and her friends, all 5 of them, a safe trip back to Nigeria, as well as the others who will be making that inaugural flight from Ukraine back in the evacuation as a result of the invasion of Russia into the country. In the meantime, close to 500 Ghanaian students have left Ukraine en route to Poland, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic following Russia's invasion. According to the Ghanaian Foreign Minister, Shirley Ayoko Bochwe, the students will be received by officials from the country's diplomatic missions, the honorary councils, and officials of the Ghanaian Students Association. They will be arriving in Ghana in the coming days. Much earlier today, parents and guardians of the students were invited by the government to a meeting in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. The government had earlier urged Ghanaian students in Ukraine to seek shelter in their homes or designated government places to shelter. Ghana has more than 1,000 nationals currently working on studying in Ukraine.
And according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, thousands and thousands of children in Ukraine are at risk of dying in the conflict. Speaking from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, UNICEF spokesman James Elder said Ukrainian children would suffer trauma from the fighting. Elder was speaking as a Russian armored column bore down on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, on Tuesday after the deadly shelling of civilian areas in its second-largest city indicated that frustrated Russian commanders could resort to more devastating tactics to achieve the goals of their invasion. More than 500,000 people have fled Ukraine, according to the UN Refugee Agency, setting off a refugee crisis as thousands await passage at European border crossings. At the United Nations, the General Assembly met ahead of a vote to isolate Russia, deploring Moscow's aggression against Ukraine.
We know children have been killed. We know that thousands and thousands are at risk. And we know that more children gut-wrenchingly are going to die or be injured in this unless fighting ends. And right now we see an escalation across those cities. So we are going to send, that's part of that. We are going to see more children separated from families, more fathers handing children across the border guards in Poland. And I wish I had more numbers, and we're seeking them, but we don't. But there are orphanages. There are tens of thousands of children in orphanages in Ukraine, many of those in these major cities which are under bombardment right now.
Still ahead on the program, residents of Lviv rushed to join the civil defense forces against Russia's invasion.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. Still watching our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Day 6 today. Countries around the world continue to impose fresh sanctions, though, against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The European Union, Japan, Australia, New Zealand and Taiwan all hit Moscow with new injunctions since Friday, February 25th, condemning the military incursion that unfolded, which is now in its 6th day. The European Union began with sanctions targeting the energy and transporting sectors, banning financing, targeting 70% of Russia's banking sector, making it impossible for Russia to upgrade its oil refineries. It placed sanctions on Russian elite deposits, a clear message that they cannot hide their money anymore in safe havens in Europe. The United States similarly put Russian-wide restrictions on technology, including telecommunications, maritime technologies, semiconductors, and others. Russian banks are also affected in all of this because they described it as corrupt billionaires. Their families who are close to the Kremlin have also been affected by the sanctions. The U.S. Department of Treasury targets the core infrastructure of Russia's financial system, sanctioning 2 of its largest banks. Also, 2 significant Belarusian state-owned banks, 9 defense firms, and 7 regime-connected officials and elites are also affected.
Well, the UK, in a 10-point sanctions package, placed an asset freeze on Russian state banks, similar to Canada and Australia. 100 individuals and entities, they are also prevented from fundraising in the UK. A ban was placed on Russia's Aeroflot. It also applied sanctions to Belarus for its role in the assault on Ukraine. For New Zealand, the Prime Minister announced the prohibition of export of goods to the Russian military to cut trade and impose travel bans against Russian officials. While Japan is sanctioning Russia's financial institutions, Taiwan plans to join the economic sanctions against Russia without specifying which measures were being considered. Now, South Korea tightened export control, blocking some Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system. And these are just a few of the sanctions that we're learning about. Now, Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist and Strategy Consultant, PricewaterhouseCoopers, joins us for more on the sanctions to Russia. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What do you think of these measures aimed at asphyxiating Russia's economy? Will they work?
Well, let me start by saying, I mean, the entire world is just revulsion at what has happened here with the invasion of Ukraine, and you've all seen the videos there, the attack on civilians, the hardship that so many refugees are suffering, including African refugees, and really credit to the federal government of Nigeria, who's now arranging for evacuation. So, I mean, it's difficult to recall it's an event like this that has brought the whole world together. So when you ask the question, will these sanctions have an impact? I think they will. When you take the totality of them, the ban on SWIFT, the ban on the freezing of the central bank reserve currencies, essentially locking the Soviet Union, the Russia out of the world's financial system, and of course, you know, we're having the sports boycotts as well, I mean, being ejected from the sports, and every field of human activity. The Russians are now being told that they're not welcome. And you look at the number of countries that have come together to express this. I think this will have a big impact.
But then when you look at Russia, it doesn't seem as if it's backing down. Plus, you also see allies, Russia's allies like Belarus, and some might even mention China, but, you know, that's not certain. Do you think that the impact of the sanctions have actually started?
Well, it's just a few days old, but there could certainly bite. I mean, people have to remember, just go back a little bit in history. I actually visited the Soviet Union in 1983 to what was called St. Petersburg, was called Leningrad, Moscow. 1985, I was in Kyiv, I was in Georgia, in Belarus as well. I mean, it used to be an enormous empire. So you had Russia, the USSR included Russia, but it also included Armenia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and then you had the Iron Curtain. So you had countries that were outside of the Soviet Union, but were effectively part of their bloc, their military and economic bloc. So you had East Germany, you had Poland, you had Yugoslavia, you had Czechoslovakia, which of course is now split into two countries. You had Hungary, you had Mongolia, the other side, and it also included 5 of the stands. So Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, etc. So it was an enormous empire. And of course, we had this incredible conflict, the Cold War between the United States and the USSR and its allied countries and NATO. And then that got swept away in Glasnost under President Gorbachev. And Russia has always felt this, this loss of empire. And of course, a lot of the Putin's regime has been around restoring this pride back to Russia. And in some of the cases where he's acted, people have not stood up to him. So taking a Crimea, taking a Chechnya from Soviet Georgia, for example, on that. But this time the world has stood up together and said, this is just not acceptable to roll tanks in, kill civilians, unprovoked attacks on people, and you see the world standing together, and I think it will have an impact. And I think ultimately Russia's going to find that it fails. And I don't, people who listen to me in economics know I don't make predictions about the future, but it's very difficult for me to see how the Putin regime survives this when it's now made a pariah of itself with so many countries around the world. Of course, it has, China remains a friend, but even they did not veto at the UN on that. India has not come out condemning Russia. They have a long positive history with Russia, in fact. But the rest of the world has effectively come out very strongly. So it's just great to see that people will stand up to tyranny.
Indeed, and for President Putin really is not finding those sanctions funny and not welcome at all. But some of the measures, including limiting technology, cutting off Russia's central bank and the SWIFT banking, are all weapons being used against Russia right now. In which way does it affect Russia directly?
Well, Russia's economy depends on exporting hydrocarbons largely and other natural resources and importing goods from elsewhere, and they're particularly fond of luxury goods from the West, for example. They're particularly fond of being Westerners in a sense. Culturally, they're very close to the West. So that is now being taken away. I mean, obviously, they have China as a as a partner in all of this. They can sell their oil to China. They can buy Chinese goods. But the fact that you're going to have the Russian aristocracy, the kleptocracy at the top, the oligarchs cut off from being able to travel in Europe, being able to travel to London, you're going to have them have their assets confiscated. I mean, we all know that there's an enormous amount of Russian wealth concentrated in the London property market, for example, and that's really going to bite. So, and then of course the businesses themselves in Russia. So we've seen the ruble drop 30% as a result of this war. So the goods that Russians buy, as I said, are all imported. So all of a sudden, those goods have gone up considerably, and it puts pressure on the ordinary Russian. So, so the ordinary Russians see young Russian soldiers going to the Ukraine and dying, and they also see their standard of living falling. And so there is going to be pressure from the bottom. Despite the despotism we see in Putin's Russia, we still see people on the street, even in the early days of this conflict. And that's only going to increase as the more economic hardship. So, of course, they'll be able to sell their oil to other buyers on that, but they're not going to be able to have a stronger economy. But the other thing about the economy, if we go back a little bit to the fall of the Soviet Union, I mean, it's attributed in many ways to the fact that the USSR couldn't keep up economically with the West. So you had a very rigid system. As I said, I was there. I remember going to the shop. There was essentially shops. There was nothing to buy. And eventually they couldn't keep up from a military sense because of the wealth of the West and the wealth created by our capitalist system. In a way, we're replaying that same movie, because even though we've moved on from the USSR, the economy in the in Russia, today is still very small. It's smaller than the economy of Canada, my home country. So you can't, I mean, I have a hard time conceiving of having that small an economy. The idea of Canada threatening other nations that are not small compared to Canada. I mean, in this case, the Ukraine is about a third of the population already of Russia. So I think that they, from an economic viewpoint, may have really bitten off more than they could chew. They made the assumption, it seems naively, that the Ukrainian people would welcome them, there wouldn't be a cost. But it's obvious now you cannot hold Ukraine with, with this army. There's going to continue to be resistance, even if they manage to conquer the two major cities in the next little while on that. And economically, they don't have they're not a large enough economy to support this kind of effort. So ultimately, I think Russia is going to find that it loses this battle.
Dr. Nevin, I mean, finally, how does the global financial system work? I'm asking because I'm wondering if these sanctions also impact the flow of financial capital, the purpose of investment and trade financing, and perhaps a sort of ripple effect.
Well, no, absolutely. So, I mean, let's remember, despite the talk of the death of the U.S. dollar, we still have a financial system that's largely based on the U.S. dollar, a little bit on the euro, smaller amount on the yen and the pound. The yuan, Chinese yuan, has not really become a currency. So to participate in international trade, you basically need dollars. I think about 2/3 of the world trade is in dollars. Oil, of course, is denominated in dollars. And so all the listeners understand, I mean, the enormity of this, I mean, you've just cut off, you cannot use US dollars in the banking system without being connected to the US, because the money center banks that control the system are all based in New York. They see every transaction that's part of it. You cannot send the dollars from, say, a Russian bank to a Chinese bank without passing through the US. So in a sense, it just freezes so many transactions. And of course, there are workarounds over time. There's barter systems. I mean, you have India and Russia have some barter for oil. For example, they can do both barter, or they can trade in yuan and rubles for China, but you're taking them out of the major flows of the economy. Now, in terms of investment, I mean, the big investment pools are in Europe and in the United States. They're no longer going to be permitted to invest in Russia, so that puts enormous pressure on the capital required for their industries. We've already seen Shell and BP exit, basically give up their stakes in those Russian companies as a result of this. And then you're not going to have access to all sorts of services that are still provided by the West, including aircraft, oil services, and a significant amount for Russia. And they're just not going to have it. So yes, you can adjust over time, but it is a major damage to it. And as I said, also just from a cultural viewpoint and from the lifestyle of the oligarchs. I mean, when they have their yachts seized, they have their housing seized, they're not permitted to go to the UK, they're not permitted to go to any European country, they're not permitted in Canada, they're not permitted in the US, they're not permitted in Japan probably. I mean, that becomes very difficult. So I think the cumulative effect of becoming a pariah is just going to start to weigh very, very quickly, both on the average Russian, who, as I said, is also going to suffer through this, but also particularly the oligarchic class. And of course, that's why it was done, was to put pressure on the people around Putin who have become billionaires as a result of this repressive regime over the last 25 years.
So quite a lot of things going on. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist, Strategy Consultant, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thanks for joining us on the program.
You're very welcome.
Much earlier in the program, we told you Russian defense forces had said, Russian military forces, beg your pardon, had said that they had plans, there were plans to bomb Kyiv, to send missiles into the country, and they also warned people to leave the city as soon as possible. Well, this came before we entered the studio. There are reports of a blast near a TV tower in Kyiv. Russia's defense ministry, as we said, had warned Kyiv residents it was preparing to hit targets across the Ukrainian capital. And meanwhile, the Ukrainian president is speaking to an emergency session of the European Parliament, telling them, prove that you are with us. Addressing the session via video link, he once again appealed for EU membership.
President Zelensky, once again relentless in calling Europe and Western allies on their support, told the EU emergency session to prove that you were with us, to prove that you will not let us go, to prove that you are indeed Europeans, and then life will win over death and light will win over darkness. He spoke emotionally about Russian attacks on Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, saying, imagine in the morning 2 cruise missiles hit Freedom Square. Dozens of victims. This is the price of freedom. European lawmakers, many wearing Stand With Ukraine T-shirts bearing the Ukrainian flag, others with blue and yellow scarves or ribbons, gave Zelensky a standing ovation. Later, President of the European Commission gave chilling analysis of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, describing it as a battle between the rule of law and the rule of the gun.
War has returned to Europe. Almost 30 years after the Balkan Wars and over half a century after Soviet troops marched into Prague and Budapest, civil defense sirens again went off in the heart of a European capital. Men, women, children are dying once again because a foreign leader, President Putin, decided that their country, Ukraine, has no right to exist. And we will never, ever let that happen and never, ever accept that.
She warned that the EU will never accept the view that Ukraine has no right to exist and condemned President Putin's naked aggression against the country. She said if Moscow was seeking to divide the international community, it has achieved the exact opposite, citing the bloc's coordination with allies.
And if Putin was seeking to divide the European Union, to weaken NATO, and to break the international community, he has achieved exactly the opposite. We are more united than ever, and we will stand up in this war. That is for clear that we will overcome and we will prevail. We are united and we stay united.
Western countries have imposed a number of sanctions against Russia in a move to cripple Putin's advancement in Ukraine. One of Russia's richest men, Ukrainian-born Mikhail Friedman, says the war in Ukraine should be stopped as soon as possible, as it's a tragedy for both sides. Cut.
And as the fighting continues between Russian and Ukrainian forces, many are heeding the Ukrainian president's call to join the military. Many in the city of Lviv, near the Polish border, have been signing up to join the civilian defense forces ready to defend their city. Lviv is ringed by military checkpoints manned by soldiers, which cause long tailbacks at night. One intersection in the south is fortified with concrete barriers, sandbags and car tires, we hear, with open space around it scattered with anti-tank hedgehogs made from scavenged metal. Dozens of reservists in uniform lined up outside a nearby army base, many of them veterans of previous campaigns against Russia in Donbass. A poster outside the base read, "Protecting the country is everyone's duty."
And China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Zhang Zhun, on Monday called on all parties concerned to prevent a massive humanitarian crisis over the Ukraine issue at a UN Security Council meeting, noting that the current situation in Ukraine is heart-wrenching. Mr. Zhun asked all parties involved to exercise restraint, try to alleviate the situation and avoid civilian casualties. He said all the civilian people's life and property security and the humanitarian needs, including those of foreign nationals, should be effectively guaranteed. Special forces should be made to guard against massive humanitarian crisis, while welcoming the UN Security Secretary General's statement that the United Nations will play an active role in coordinating humanitarian assistance. Mr. Zhun said China holds that in providing humanitarian assistance, the UN and the international community should abide by the principles of humanity, neutrality and impartiality established by the UN General Assembly Resolution 46/182, so as to guard against the politicization of humanitarian actions. According to him, what is of utmost importance now is to return to the track of diplomatic negotiation and political settlement as soon as possible, so as to push forward the de-escalation of the situation. He says China supports Russia and Ukraine in holding direct dialogue and negotiation, which is fundamentally way out to solve the problem. He stressed the international community should foster favorable external conditions for dialogue, political statements, and steer clear of exacerbating the tensions.
Over to the United Kingdom, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson says his country is ready to intensify sanctions against Russia. During a press conference today, he praised the leadership and courage of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who he says has mobilized his country and the world amid the Russian invasion. He also said he underestimated the unity and resolve of the West, saying it will keep up the economic pressure on Russia through sanctions. However, Executive Director of the Kyiv-based Anti-Corruption Action Center, Daria Kalunik, says she is disappointed with the Prime Minister's response to her question about imposing a no-fly zone over her country, Ukraine. She says that without a no-fly zone, it would not be possible to get humanitarian aid to children trapped in Ukraine by the invasion. Mr. Johnson said the crisis was not something that the UK can fix by military means.
In the morning. It's 126 hours since Vladimir Putin launched a war of aggression on our continent, tearing up every principle of civilized behavior between states. He's hurled his war machine on the people of Ukraine, a fellow Slavic country. He's bombarded civilian targets, fired rockets at blocks of flats. He's responsible for hundreds of civilian casualties, including growing numbers of children, and also, of course, for the deaths of many Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. And the UK will provide up to £220 million of emergency and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And I've placed 1,000 troops on standby to help the humanitarian response in neighbouring countries, including in Poland.
You're watching the live coverage of developments in Ukraine following the Russian invasion. Still to come, more protests from around the world against Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We're still tracking developments out of Ukraine this hour. Our technology correspondent, Victor Matthias, is with us now. He's following the updates online, which is being streamed on our social media platforms. Victor?
Victor, go right ahead.
Well, Victor, we were talking to a few Nigerians, I guess, who are on either side of the border, either or still at the Ukrainian border or have made the crossover into Poland or Romania. And so on. We did have him sometime, I think on Monday or on Friday, we did have him on Friday. Victor spoke to a few Nigerians. He has a lineup of them. You can follow the conversation on Channels Media, Channels TV's social media platforms, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. So take your pick. Victor.
Television is hosting, where we have Nigerians joining us from virtually a lot of countries. Nigerians who have actually crossed, who have exited Ukraine are now in Slovakia, in Russia, I beg your pardon, in Romania, in Slovakia, quite a number of countries. So I have some of them with me. They've actually said so much since we started this conversation, and but like, it's always good to hear from the horse's mouth. So let me just quickly start with Jessica. Jessica is also joining us from Hungary. She's currently in Debrecen. Jessica, again, thanks for being with us on this chat and sharing your experience. But earlier on, you shared your experience and how you moved, or how you went from Ukraine to Hungary. If you could tell us your experience again, what was it like? I know you made mention of trekking for about 12 hours, but what was it like for you? What were you thinking about, during those 12 hours of trekking?
It was very traumatizing. Like the term walking, I literally limp right now, and I could not believe that it was humanly possible to trek for 12 hours. The fact that I just wanted to get out, I was like, I could do it. If I got tired, I sat down. I didn't even know it was 12 hours till I sat down and I checked my phone. I had been walking for 12 hours, and I hadn't even gotten to the border yet. I had to sleep and start all over again. And the thing that was so painful the most, even talking right now, is the fact that even when I saw a bus going straight from where I was at that moment to get to the Polish border, the officials told me only Ukrainians. I said I was pregnant. I said everything. I begged, I cried. They looked me in the face and said, no internationals, just Ukrainians. Literally, a cat got on board. Like, when I keep saying it again, it's like, how was that possible? Like, if a bomb was to come, would it choose what color it would bomb? Like, I was so ashamed of being black at that point, because of being white was the only way you could get out. And those at the border, the black men, and if you were a black man going to the border, you were treated like trash. Some people had to start coming back. When I saw that happened, I told myself that I cannot do it. I went back to my city to sleep. I had given up. But luckily for me, I found a bus that was going straight to the train station that would take me to Hungary. And I hopped on that bus from my city. And when I got to Chop train station, it was devastating. There were so many people trying to get out, and the soldiers did not care. They were pushing you back. They didn't care if you fell, if your documents fell, even if you fainted. They would literally take you back to Lviv just to get treated without your documents. And when you wake up after fainting, you have no documentation. I had to bribe my way through to get across the Ukrainian border. The Ukrainians are only prioritizing their citizens to cross. Internationals, blacks, we cannot cross, just Ukrainians.
So again, we sympathize with you, for what you've gone through, and also still thank you, for taking out time to speak with us. Of course, would also admonish that you remain safe where you are, until you reach out, to the embassy, and an agreement is reached on whether to bring you back to Nigeria or to remain where you are. But let's also take a listen to Olale, who is in Romania. Olale was also telling us about some of his experiences while all of this was happening, while he was trying to move from Ukraine into Romania. Olale, what was your experience, and what is the situation with you right now where you are?
Well, thank you very much. My experience was quite varied, because I stayed in Vinica, and we were able to get a bus that took us down to the border at Siret. Now, on getting to the border, of course, as Jessica said, the Ukrainians there prioritize the safe passage of their citizens, which, to be honest, I can hardly fault them for, but they should have they should have done a lot better to ensure that the foreigners there were taken care of, because the soldiers that were put in charge of us, it was almost like they didn't care. It was almost like they didn't care. And overall, we stood at that border for about 9 hours, just being told to move back, organize yourselves. So the people that were with me, thankfully, were very proactive, and we decided to take action. So we looked around, we saw that the soldiers in charge of the border did not care. They only cared for organization. So we found a way to make sure that the crowd was organized, and then we used it to our advantage to push our people through. At the end of the day, our people were able to pass through the border in a space of about 10 hours. It was what we had to do, and we did it, and we got through the border, and thankfully we were received well from the moment we stepped into Romania.
So it's a good thing that you were received well. So how has that been since? What has been, when you say well, can you define what well is? What has been your experience since crossing?
Okay, when I say well, I mean we've been treated well. The Romanians themselves are a very hospitable bunch. They've been offering us food from the very moment we were at the border, down to the train station. In the train, every stop, people come in, offer us food, offer us drinks. We've also received a lot of help from the Nigerian embassy. We did our best to contact them before we left Vinica. So on arriving in Romania, they were waiting for us. So they helped organize a ride to the train station in Soseva, which is the county we got into in Romania. And then we got to the train station and took a free ride on a train from the train station there. The government there was making the trains free for people who escaped from Ukraine. So we took a free ride down to Bucharest, and now we're here in Bucharest. We're in a hotel. We have accommodation for everyone who came with us, and we're going to be given this accommodation. I hear it's for 3 days, after which we will have to cater for ourselves.
All right, I hope you have the capacity to cater for yourself, and I hope more well-meaning citizens of Nigeria, and even buddies out there who are watching out, for humanitarian crises as this would be available to move you to the next step. But let's also quickly hear from Jessica. Jessica, what has been the situation since you crossed? Have you been able to reach the embassy officials? And how have you been coping? Have you been having free food and free drinks from people around? What's the situation where you are in Hungary?
The reception in Hungary was different from the one in Romania. In Hungary, there was nobody to receive us, nothing. Like, you were clueless. But luckily for us, the tickets to get to Budapest was free. So, but I stopped at Debrecen because I had friends here. So my friends were the ones that got me a place to stay, got me foods to drink. I called the numbers provided by the embassy. They were unavailable. I emailed. There was no response so far. So literally, it's just my family assisting me and my friends. All the students here in Hungary, there has not been any help from the embassy, just from like fellow students or your friends helping you, or even from your family back home.
All right. Hopefully that help would come eventually. But again, I'd admonish you to stay safe in all of this. And of course, let's hope that things would simmer down very soon. But let's also get to hear from Aziz. Aziz is joining us also, I think, from Slovakia. Aziz, remind us quickly and tell us what the situation is where you are right now. Have you been able to contact the embassy officials, and how has that been going on for you?
Okay. So my name is Aziz. I'm from Ukraine, Uzhgorod city. I'm the Nigerian Student Union president in my city. So right now I'm in Slovakia. Well, actually, the situation here is quite different, because my city is actually like a safe city. It's very safe from the war. The war is like in Kyiv, in Kharkiv. I'm in the western part of Ukraine. You understand? So most people actually come to my city to escape to other places.
All right, let me just hold you there for a bit. We need to log out of the television broadcast and continue the conversation on our Facebook live right now. So I'd have to say thank you again to all of you for joining us here. But as it is now, Amarachi Millicent, this is a situation on the live chat, the live Zoom chat. But of course, let me just hand it over back to you guys in the studio to continue while we continue the chat, which is streaming live on Facebook.
Indeed, our technology correspondent Victor Matthias there, and you can indeed connect with the situation, what Nigerians are facing, students trying to cross, those at the borders and those in other countries surrounding Ukraine. It's Channels Television on Instagram, Channels Television on Facebook, and at Channels TV on Twitter. Well, thousands of people have taken to public squares in Russian embassies across the globe to protest President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. From London and New York to Beirut and Istanbul, demonstrators, some cloaked in Ukrainian flags, they've come out in droves to show solidarity with Ukrainians.
And just an update before we go, 5 people have reportedly been killed in that explosion near a TV tower in Kyiv. There are still no reports yet about the tower, but it looks like it's still standing. But that's the first attack by Russia today on the Ukrainian capital. And as we close the program, cheery news for our sports lovers as a sports program Sports at 6 comes up in just a few minutes on your screens.
I know a lot of people are excited about that.
Oh, yeah, they missed it. Thanks for watching. I'm Rakshi Ubani.
I'm Millicent Walker.